Welcome to CHPCA's National Grief and Bereavement Day webinar, How to Remember, Reflect, and Connect in Grief for Grievers and Everyone, presented by the St. Elizabeth Foundation. My name is Kat. I'm part of the CHPCA team, and I'm so glad to see you all joining us today. And I'll be kind of walking along with you with all of our speakers throughout today's webinar. We want to start off acknowledging that the territories where the CHPCA team is located are on the unceded territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, the traditional unceded territory of the Huron-Wendat people, the treaty territory of the Fort William First Nation, signatories to the Robinson Superior Treaty in 1850, and the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples who have lived, grieved, and been the caretakers of this land since time immemorial. So this year's National Grief and Bereavement Day campaign calls on us to remember, reflect, and connect throughout our journeys with grief, with ourselves and with others. So throughout today's webinar, we'll be exploring different ways that we can do that with our own experiences and how we can use those as a bridge to connect and support those around us who are facing grief, since grief is so universal. We will all experience it at some point in our lives. We will all grieve the loss of a loved one or the loss of other things. It's not just, we don't only grieve people, we also grieve experiences, senses, personal self-identities or relationships, friendships, pets, and so many others. So it's important for us to acknowledge that and to name it and to be there for one another when we go through it. So a few housekeeping items before I turn things over for our first activity. The webinar will be recorded. We will be sharing the link to the recording and along with our presenters' wonderful slides to everyone who registered. So if you need to pop off, if there are any issues, you'll still be able to access the recording and the presentation content. If you have questions, share them either in the Q&A box or in the webinar chat throughout. We will be keeping track of them as you send them. If there are some that are timely that kind of need to be addressed throughout the presentation, we'll ask those, but otherwise we will reserve them for the question period at the end. And we did save plenty of time for us to have a really robust conversation and address as many questions as we can. And finally, today's webinar is meant to be informational. What's being presented shouldn't be taken as medical advice. These amazing speakers are super knowledgeable, but they're not your care providers, not involved in your personal care, so they can't provide personal medical or mental health advice. We recommend that you reach out to your personal health care teams if there are similar questions that you would like more information on. So now we get to the fun stuff, or the helpful, reflective, incisive, participative component of today's webinar. Sorry about that. So I will now turn things over to CHPCA's CEO, Laurel Gillespie. She'll be presenting about the Reflection Room project by the St. Elizabeth Foundation and walking us through a short virtual reflection activity. Over to you, Laurel.
Thanks, Kat, for this warm welcome. I'm really honored and I'm humbled today to be presenting on behalf of St. Elizabeth Health Foundation, who's doing some tremendous work across the country and advocating for those who are less fortunate, but just doing amazing work. They weren't able to make it today. So I guess many of you are probably wondering and asking, what is a reflection room? Kat, if you want to go ahead, we'll let everybody know the inside scoop on what a reflection room is.
All the deaths were terrible experiences, but all of them also taught me things which I am more than grateful to have learned. Patience, forgiveness, compassion. That first lonely summer following my husband's death, when it felt like I was also grieving the loss of myself, that the happy woman I always was had somehow died too, I would come to know a joy deeper and richer than I ever knew before.
Grief is a universal human experience, whether caused by dying and death or indeed through other forms of loss. But we usually don't think about grief and we don't talk about it much in our society. The Reflection Room offers the opportunity for storytelling to help people think about experiences surrounding grief and loss. You can come to a reflection room and read other people's stories. You can reflect on your own experiences with grief and, if you wish, write your own story and add it to the reflection wall. By sharing stories, people will become more comfortable with expressing grief and loss. The Reflection Room has traveled extensively to public and community spaces all across Canada, and you can also read and share stories online.
So, the neat thing about reflection rooms is that they're popping up all over our country through the generosity of the St. Elizabeth Foundation. Just last year, we sent out, I believe it was about 130 to local hospices across Canada, and they were embraced. So you can actually order a reflection room so that you could set one up at, a gathering of peers in your local library, at a school, and that's the goal, is that we're going to try to get reflection rooms set up wherever we can. And we're learning that it's a very important avenue for people to be able to express their sense of loss and anonymously or not, be able to share their feelings, thoughts, and hopes for the future. So it was developed by a research team in 2016 as part of their commitment as social enterprise to action-oriented research, and that is to help those in our communities that are most vulnerable. So today it's gifted to these communities, just like I just mentioned, by the foundation to help people cope with grief and loss. So during the research, there was over 1,000 reflections that were written and then uploaded online on the online community, so virtually. So there is a website there that you are free to visit if you wish to share your reflections. And we're hoping today that you've been able to come prepared with a pen and a piece of paper or a pencil, maybe even a cup of tea, and do something together as a group virtually to share, to remember, to remember those that we've maybe lost recently, and to reflect on that, and to perhaps even share it if you're comfortable. Next slide, Kat. So you'll have about, so this activity, you're going to write your own story to pause, to reflect, and perhaps share. But something that we could all bind us together is a favorite memory of a loved one or a loved fur. So we're going to give you about 5 minutes to create that. And if you wish, you can post it online at that website. And if you do have any future questions about how you can bring a reflection room to your community, you can email Hannah Irving at ceh.com and or visit the website, thereflectionroom.ca. So shall we begin?
And we will have a little bit of music just so that we're not all sitting in complete silence.
I hope that felt good for everyone, that you were able to take some time to reflect. And as I noted in the question and answer room that someone mentioned, when saying someone you've recently lost, but why not a great loss that continues to impact years and years later? Noted, and thank you for that gentle reminder of, grief is successive. It can be, many, many years, and it sometimes never truly ever goes away. And in fact, one of my reflection today was I miss hearing my dad sing. And one of his favorite songs to sing to, one of his 8 children or many, many grandchildren was "You Are My Sunshine." So I like to enjoy a nice big cup of warm tea, and it's big so I can wrap my hands around it. It's like I'm getting a good old big hug from my dad. So there's many different ways, but you're absolutely right. Whoever posted the question and the question and answer, that it doesn't have to be a recent loss. It can linger and linger and linger. And the idea behind this is it's okay to remember and it's okay to reflect. So with that, I wanted to thank everyone for participating in this. And do feel free if you want to share something in the chat room, or again, go online and share it at the reflection room, because it can have almost like a chain effect. And you're doing something that can have an impact that might be able to help someone else who may be grieving or experiencing loss. And in that moment, at some point today, as you think about your experience sharing your time with us today, just to take a moment that our whole world is grieving right now. We're experiencing even ourselves about what's happening internationally to people just like you and I, like us, who gather in our communities, although this is virtual, but take that moment to, grieve for them that are experiencing a sense of great loss in life of what was, and wish them hope that their future has joy in it. And with that, I'm going to hand it back off to our host, Kat. And I sincerely wish that you will reach out if there's anything CHPCA can do to help support you, or with any of the resources that we have on hand to help you honor your person or your pet or whatever that sense of loss is. We're here to support you and honor and help you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Laurel. And well, so now that we've taken some time to reflect on our own experiences with loss, I will now it'll be time to tap into our creative sides with a wonderful collage activity to explore the role of art therapy in the face of grief, preserve memory, create a vision for the future. So our next speaker is Heather Brown. She is a registered Canadian art therapist and a registered psychotherapist qualifying, who has been working alongside individuals and their families within a hospice setting for the last 8 years. Heather believes that death and grief, though complex and difficult, can also be a time when one's life can be celebrated, honored, and held with grace. Heather is currently the lead therapist at Hospice Georgian Triangle in Collingwood, Ontario. She has a love for the rural way of life and a great appreciation for the waterfall that lulls her quiet village to sleep every night. So thank you, Heather, and now I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Kat. As Kat said, I'm Heather, and I'm incredibly honored and excited to be here today with everybody. Yeah, I've been working in hospice for these last 8 years as a volunteer and then as a staff member for 7. And yeah, I think it's such a true honor to be able to come on platforms like this and talk about grief and death and loss and kind of take away that grief phobic, death phobic society that we have and bring these conversations out into the open. So I'm grateful for everybody being here today and grateful to be here myself. So I am just going to share my screen. Make sure I get this right. Okay, can everybody see my screen there? Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so I am going to be taking us through a commemorative collage journey. I've titled this piece that I've put together for today, Anchoring Grief. What I'm going to be doing today is in a few minutes, I'll invite you to do some creations of your own. But what I wanted to do was really anchor a conversation today in some collage images that I'm going to show you up on the screen, and weave those in and anchor them down with Alan Wolfelt's Needs of Mourning, something that I use quite often with my clients, and something that I think provides people with a lot of psychoeducation, but also empowerment and knowledge to know that, that grief, that we can see, the movement that we have through our grief. Before I really tap into this and tell you a little bit about what we're going to be doing, I just want to let everybody know that I will be sharing art throughout the course of my presentation. And this art is client art that has been made in counseling sessions through hospice. So please know that all of the collages that are going to be shared are shared with permission from these individuals. The placement in the presentation, the words that I share about each image have all been agreed upon previously as well. All of my artists have agreed to, or have chosen, to remain anonymous. And it's with their permission that I also share that some of them are here today, and they'll have the opportunity to witness their art being held by this virtual audience, and their grief stories shared, knowing that the audience here today is compassionate to their journey, and maybe too showing up hopeful that somebody listening to their stories and seeing their images will get some comfort and understanding, knowing that somebody else has been there too. So thank you to my clients for allowing me to share their images. And from here on out, I also will be referring to my clients as artists. So welcome to everybody. If you are here as somebody who is immersed in the complicated and messy, sometimes beautiful experience of grief themselves, somebody who is helping, a loved one who is experiencing grief, somebody who is working in a professional capacity alongside families in the palliative realm or the grief world. My hope for our time together is that you can lean into your sense of wonder and your sense of curiosity. I invite you to take the time to do whatever it is that you need, and what you need might vary. So maybe you want to make art, maybe you've come here prepared today with scissors and glue and collage images. So please feel free to create alongside. But maybe you've come and you just want to reflect, as we did, with the reflection room, and you want to write a little note alongside the presentation, reflect along the words and the images that you're seeing. Maybe you just need to sit comfortably in silence and witness and take it in. So however you need to show up today is fine. I'm glad you're here. A reminder again, as Kat said, this is a recorded webinar. So if you're feeling like, you're here today, but you're not showing up in the capacity that you want to, know that you can come back to this at any point and revisit some of these words that are spoken and some of these things that are being presented. I think that Kat had put a link in the chat about, there's also a virtual collage website that we had found. So if you didn't come prepared with materials, or if some of the materials I suggested don't work for you very well, then there is an opportunity to make collage online on this lovely website. So I think that's in the link there. Before I actually dive into this little piece here, I do want to just say that making collage and witnessing people's artwork sometimes can be pretty evocative. And I want to give everybody permission this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world, just to meet yourself with compassion, grace, and patience for wherever you are. So there's not a true directive here when it comes to me introducing this idea of collage. Really what I want to do is allow everybody to create whatever feels intuitively calling to them. So if you have materials, please just start at any point. You will see images up on the screen, and perhaps you're inspired by them. Perhaps you're inspired by the needs of mourning as I discuss them, but bring those together in whatever way feels right to you. When we talk about collage, the dictionary defines collage as an artistic composition made of various materials glued onto a surface. But I like to expand that definition to include that collage is an art form that allows for creative expression, intuitive choice, a sense of control, limitless expression of your inner landscape, an exploration of symbolic representations, and so much more. Without getting too much into, art therapy, because we could talk about that all day, right? With collage, we're exploring images, symbolic representation, color, symbol, all of these things and what they mean to us. So our art might not be, interpreted the same from one person to the other, but it's really how it sits and resonates with us as we make it. But again, if you are here today creating a collage or looking through a magazine, looking for the images to bring into your collage, I want to encourage you to choose those images based off of an intuition, whether that's your heart that pulls you or your gut or something else, right? Sit with curiosity and wonder when you see these images and take them, even though you might not understand why you're being called to them. I titled my presentation a commemorative grief journey, and I just want to speak on that word commemorative for a moment too, because to commemorate something means to recall and show respect for someone or something. So as much as we are commemorating people that we have loved and lost, past or just recently, right, we're also showing up and respecting ourselves. So we're commemorating the journeys that we go through. We're commemorating the work that we've done, the work that we're yet to do, the things that we're learning and relearning. So what I want to do today is offer a space to honor these people that we love that might no longer be with us, but also to honor ourselves. So sorry for my big preamble ramble there, but I do want to begin by saying this quote from Alan Wolfelt here, that, we all grieve when somebody that we love dies, but if we are to heal, we must also mourn. So part of this piece and part of, why I think art therapy pairs so well with grief is that because it allows us another outlet in our life to mourn, right? For those, who want a really very brief definition, right? When we talk about grief, we talk about the internal experience, what we feel, what we think, right? What's happening on the inside. And when we talk about mourning, we talk about how we're expressing those feelings and those thoughts, how we're bringing that out into the world. So art therapy is a great way of taking those inner thoughts and feelings and putting them out on the page, especially, if we don't quite know what the words are that we want to match these feelings or these thoughts, but we can use image and metaphor and color to create things that represent how we might be thinking or feeling. When we talk about art therapy too, one of the main things, again, I won't get too into art therapy, but what I think is really important to speak to today is art therapy is about the process over the product. So we're not out here, trying to create a gorgeous collage or a gorgeous painting or any of these things, right? But we're really paying attention to how our body feels in the process of making it, what comes up for us in the process of making it, and how that process feels. So I'm going to jump right into the needs of mourning. I'm not going to number the needs of mourning for the sake of today's presentation, because I don't want people to believe that grief is linear, because it's not. We don't do things in, stages as once we thought, right? There's a bit of a misconception out there still in the world, especially for people who have never experienced a firsthand death of a loved one, that, we should go through these stages and click through them one by one. But in reality, we weave in and out of them, and sometimes one lasts longer than the other, just as I believe with these needs as well. So the first need here is to acknowledge the reality of the death. So sometimes we need to say something time and time again for it to feel real. Sometimes we need to live out these moments time and time again for them to really sink in. Sometimes forces within us don't want to do this, and it's by exploring our grief, what changes and what has changed in how we feel and think, that can help us bring this acknowledgement into being. So here on the screen are two images, and I am going to keep kind of flopping back to my notes here because I want to make sure I do justice to the artist by speaking the words that we discussed. So there's two images here by two different artists, both seeking to explore and depict the loneliness and feelings of despair when bringing to light the reality of their person's death. The artist on the left expressed themselves in a dull, feeling dull in a world of color. They adapted words found in an article and chose to include their title in their piece, saying, "No one's here anymore." The artist on the right expressed feeling stagnant and void of color in a world once full of possibilities. They spoke about their person being alive, and when they were alive, how they would fill that void between the two worlds and bring wonder and liveliness back into the trees. The next need that we talk about here is to embrace the pain of the loss. To embrace pain is to feel grief. Pain will look and feel different for everybody. Talking to supportive and friends, families, and professionals, of course, can help us to tap into our pain, help find ways to cope and build our resiliencies, manage to keep the pain at bay until we feel ready to tap back into it. People who listen and support us in these two initial needs are sometimes what I like to refer to as, people's guiding lights, right? People who are there to listen, support, to help us hold the grief, maybe just even for a moment rather than to fix it. Help us learn when it's safe to feel into these emotions and when we need to lean on others. The art here on the screen was by an artist who expressed feeling as if the world were moving too quickly around them. They felt their life had come to a standstill and everybody else was so quick to forget, to move on, and to keep going. This person felt pain in their experience and also felt a deep desire to not forget, to stay in this place in fear of getting swept up or moving on too fast and forgetting. This artist learned that we don't move on, we don't get over it. And she learned to find comfort in taking a pause, slowing down, and embracing their own need to stay in pain sometimes. And in turn, how they felt honoring their loved one. This next artist felt pain transformed to anger, a feeling which many of you may know or may, witness your clients experiencing. This client felt like a shark on the hunt, carrying these words, invisible darkness. The artist expressed similarly to the one previously, that the world moved so quickly around them that they built up a tough skin to move with it, and that they were working on how to approach the world differently, how to learn to find understanding that others did not see their pain, and maybe they could befriend their anger, express it safely through sessions, and find ways to soften their approach to the world. We, of course, have a need, a right, and a strong desire to remember the people who have died, to keep their memories alive, to carry them with us, to find ways to continue to have a relational bond with our loved one, even though they're not here in person with us, is an important thing. This is encouraged in legacy work, and if we have the opportunity before our loved one dies, we can ask them how they want to be remembered, what their values are, and how that can live on within us, within our community, or within the world at large. People have impact. Relationships have impact. If our loved ones did not do legacy activities, that's okay too. Our work here is to learn to tell their story, to share it outside of our inner dialogue of our minds, confines of our journals. We want to remember them by saying their name, by sharing their stories, and allowing parts of who they are to guide us in who we are becoming. In these two pieces, we see artists who are remembering their loved ones. Here, the artist chose to create something of a restored memory, bringing to light things that those people love to do, things that reminded them of those special people, choosing images that they believed held story. And when speaking to clients who create images like this, or if you create images like this, right, it's often that we can look at any of these little components and we can tell a story, right? Everything holds story when it holds some kind of connection to us in our life and our loved one. The artist on the left chose the words, remember someone special, and reminisced about sharing in meals, reading books, being in the garden, precious little moments, little snippets of time that have a big impact on her sense of resiliency to continue now. The artist on the right chose the words, rediscovering a world of possibilities, tell a new story. The artist wrote a letter alongside their art and filled it with their hopes of what their loved one might be up to now, wherever they are, wherever their beliefs took them, wondering about the next place and what their loved one might be greeted with. This client was hopeful for an island with fresh fruit, ribs slathered in sauce, cheese delivered beachside, while their person explored the beach, scuba dived, enjoyed life. Wondering like this can provide such a sense of comfort and a sense of play. This sense of play and wonder, curiosity can help us in our grief journey and can help us to strengthen relational bonds, make us feel closer. You know that saying, about how laughter is the best medicine, right? There is something to that, right? Laughter helps us to be playful and joyful and creates a sense of comfort, a warmth inside us that brings us close to people, no matter how far. Develop a new self-identity. We have a need to explore our sense of self and how this death impacts how we see our place in the world. I won't go too far into the neuroscience behind some of this because that's a whole presentation all on its own. But it takes a long time to learn and relearn what once was the we or the us to what is now the I and the me. Sometimes people begin to deliberate whether they feel like they still align with the terms wife, husband, mother, parent, father, or do they also align with these new terms that are being thrown at them, right? A bereaved parent, right? A widow, a widower, a grieving person. All of these titles say something about us, and we take on parts of these titles as part of our identity. And they can either help us to grow through our grief, or they can help us, or they can create, a place of feeling stagnant and stuck in something. All of these titles and all of these ways that we identify ourselves all say something about who we are. And a lot of who we are is based out of things that are relational, that involve other people. So grief can also challenge our beliefs that we've had about ourselves. I've heard so many clients in my years working say that, I thought I was stronger than this. So the idea that, somebody valued their sense of strength and that they felt rattled by that going through the process of grief. What we always like to do, as practitioners in this field is reframe people's idea of what it means to be strong. Right? To be strong doesn't mean that we don't cry, doesn't mean that we don't feel. It's actually quite the opposite. To be strong means that we do feel and that we showcase those feelings and that we talk through those feelings and that we talk to people about what we need. part of this need that, part of this need always brings up to me the fact that that we are human. Humans are complicated, and we have a natural human response when it comes to things like grief, things that are hard, when part of our life is threatened. We can adapt, but we need time and we need care to adapt when things happen in our life that mean great changes. It's okay to be in a state of figuring it out, because the vast majority of us are and always will be. This art up here on your screen now shows an image that this artist chose to actually create twice. On the left was the way it was initially made, where the artist reflected on falling into the dark of day while struggling to find their place in the world. Through our sessions together, they found the word, breathe free, and wondered what it would be to take that on and to feel that way. This artist chose to set an intention to work on knowing that they can be both struggling and working to find ways through at the same time. A recognition of being human. We can do multiple things at the same time, and this is an important thing to know when we're struggling. This artist spoke about the felt sense of freedom and being alive, knowing that they could breathe free and explore the world with curiosity. Sometimes too, when we think about art therapy, when we think about being able to take things from within us and put them outside of us, creating something concrete, whether it's through images like collage, whether it's through painting, whether it's through free writing, right? Things don't always have to be just as they are. We can change our perspective. We can reframe something. We can adapt something. We can take our writing and distill it down by removing parts of it and creating something new. So when something like this happens in an art therapy session too, or when something like this happens in your own mind, right? When you have one of those kind of aha moments that something doesn't need to be stuck just the way it is, that it can be two things at once. Well, that's really, really impactful and really important to know that something can change and shift. And it just means sometimes that we just have to reframe or shift our perspective on how we're seeing things. This artist collected images that represent their favorite things. And they arranged them on the page to hold tight to what they knew to be true about themselves, so they didn't lose sight of their sense of identity, their sense of self. These images represent far more than things and spoke to their values in life and how they intended to uphold these values, and how some are similar and different to their deceased loved one. This artist was exploring the continued relationship with their person and how they would live on through them. This comes back to that piece, what I spoke to in the beginning about, commemorating not only the loved one, but commemorating what makes us us. What makes you who you are is in fact probably also influenced by the person that you cared for, the person that you still care for, the values that they instilled in you, or the experiences that you had together, the shared memories that you had, the shared interests, the new interests that perhaps they brought into your life. So sometimes, by creating art that represents us, we actually begin to notice that by leaning into ourselves and who we are also leaning into not only our grief, but we are leaning into the people that we love and what they've taught us. The next need is the search for meaning. It's only natural and normal to search for meaning. Something has happened that has completely shifted our life. So seeking and looking for meaning and our purpose doesn't mean that we leave our loved ones behind, but it can fuel us to move forward towards health and healing. Believe it or not, we often do experience a type of growth after going through something difficult. I actually saw a question that was posed in the chat box there about somebody talking about how we can grow around our grief. right? Rather than, our grief getting smaller, but perhaps, it's quite the opposite, right? Perhaps we actually grow and we get bigger around it. So we have, more resiliencies, more strengths, more coping skills, right? More ways that we can attend to the day growing around this grief that will be present with us for a very long time, if not forever. We never forget the pain that we feel, and sometimes we can still feel it just as powerful as we did the first day it happened. But we can strengthen our sense of resiliency through grief. We can find renewed appreciation for certain things and certain relationships. We can experience personal growth, spiritual growth, different sense of freedoms. It all is possible. But we need to align with our sense of self that wants to heal and wants to move forward. This artist found the words, "There's been rain, enough for an uprising of the flowers." They felt the rain symbolized their tears and spoke about the beauty of nature, and that even though this artist had a desire to linger in their pain, somehow nature persisted, and one day they began to notice flowers beginning to sprout, and they chose to align with the idea that growth can happen. This artist also made mention that the flowers had water droplets on them to represent how they continued to hold the pain but grew with it. That piece that I mentioned too about how we can shift our perspective and we can see things a little bit differently sometimes from one image to another, from one day to another when we look at images. These realizations from some of these artists didn't happen necessarily in the first moment that these pieces were created. That idea of the recognition of the water droplets on the flower came a little bit later when somebody felt and truly believed that their idea of growing with their grief was coming true. This artist collaged and explored a technique called blackout poetry, where we intuitively black out part of a text to create a new poem, one that's brought to life completely by us through somebody else's words. This artist's poem reads, "Imagine, I rediscovered the power of friendship, which gave me strength to continue day after day. Members of my family scarcely believe that our journey is finished. I'm a different person from the one who set out. I'm reminded I am still her little boy." In this poem, the artist found meaning through restored and strengthened friendships, a new sense of resiliency, a new sense of hope through relationship building, an acknowledgement that grief is not complete. This idea that we talked about that, we don't get over it or we don't move on, right? We don't complete something by just finishing, stage 1 through 6. Right? Or the needs of mourning, right? We don't tick just through them and call ourselves done. A new sense of self, this client is also speaking to, while also holding strong to that, to their identity as a mother's son. There is still a relationship there. Those words, "I'm still her little boy," right? Knowing true that is, part of what they want to continue to identify as, part of who they are, part of how they want to present themselves to the world. This idea of blackout poetry, just to digress for a moment here, blackout poetry can be something that is really accessible for a lot of people, especially as, first entering into the world of art therapy or the world of creative expression through our grief process or through any kind of therapeutic journey. But this idea that, all it takes is a black marker, and it takes that idea of learning to follow our intuition, to listen to something different than just our mind telling us what we should be doing or the external world putting pressure on what we should or should not be doing. This relies on our gut and our intuition to tell us what we want to choose, what has power, what holds some kind of potency, and allows us to distill down a poem. And often it can be quite surprising, like this one here, right? This magazine clipping of these words is from a National Geographic article. It's nothing fancy. The last need that I'm going to talk about is we have a need to receive ongoing support from others. We are relational beings. We need other people out there, and other people are willing to help, willing to listen, willing to support, willing to hold, willing and wanting to watch you grow, to heal, to explore. Getting support and having a desire to heal does not mean that you are leaving the person behind or that you will forget them. The pain will always exist in part, but with support and with a desire to heal, we can live a life that is not controlled by pain, and we can learn to honor it as we need to. Give it space when we want to. This artist chose the words, "Helping one person might not change the world, but it could change the world for one person." This artist spoke about compassion being contagious. And through their grief, they found many people who gave them what they needed and a newfound sense of purpose. Though this client spoke specifically to that idea of that they're still figuring out exactly what their purpose is or what that looks like, still a work in progress. The one thing that they do know is that they intend to be more compassionate themselves, putting back out there in the world what they received so in full by friends, family, loved ones, supportive professionals that were part of their journey. When we go back to receiving ongoing support from others, I want to speak to this a little bit more because this can look so different for different people. When our support systems, look different, not everybody has access to the support that everybody else is given. Not everybody has the same familial connections or support groups of friendships or support groups of local resources. So receiving ongoing support from others can be a webinar such as this one today, showing up to a room full of, hundreds of people from across Canada who are all wanting to show up to have this discussion, to enter into these conversations, to try to make a difference for one person or for many. We can receive ongoing support from going to something like that beautiful reflection room, whether it's that virtual space that we can enter into or whether we find the opportunity to see one in person. I myself have been to one of the reflections rooms when it came to Collingwood, and it's a beautiful experience to be in a room full of, sometimes strangers anonymously writing things about people that they have loved and lost here in this, physical realm that we're in. But people who are going through a very universal process. Receiving support can sometimes just be, making eye contact with someone across the room and giving a nod, right? To know that, I've been there and I understand. Sometimes those little touchstone moments, have more impact than what we know. I'm sorry, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Can everybody see me okay? Sorry, Kat, I'm just going to say one more thing here, but I just wanted to stop sharing. So I just wanted to offer a reminder to everybody again, after having that conversation, that, grief is not linear. And the works of these various artists were taken over various periods of time, and that it's just okay to be where you're at, that you're human and that you're learning and that we all are. For those people who did make art today, know that this art piece too is, a moment in time, right? You might interpret it or see it differently as, you look at it tomorrow or in 6 months. But art holds a story, and our stories are still in progress and still being written. So again, hold yourself with compassion, and I hope that people did, take a moment to enjoy some creative expression through this time too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Heather, for helping us create something meaningful with this collage activity with all of the feelings that maybe we don't know how to express otherwise. So, all right, so now I'm going to hand the baton to the intrepid Yvonne Heath, who will help us find ways to talk about the hard stuff and how to show up for ourselves and others, especially when things are hard. She'll also share about her recent humanitarian clowning trip with the real Patch Adams, and all about what she learned about the power of just showing up and of laughter. And quickly about Yvonne, in her 27-year nursing career, Yvonne Heath worked in many areas, including emergency, chemotherapy, long-term care, and hospice. She became disheartened by our society's reluctance to talk about, plan, and prepare for grief, transitions, and end of life. She wanted to create change, so she founded Love Your Life to Death and the I Just Showed Up movement. She shares her message with heart and humor, and I'm sure she will regale us with wonderful tales of adventures and wonderful ideas on how we can show up for others as well. I will hand things over to you, Yvonne. Oh, you're still muted.
Am I unmuted? There we go.
There we go. Now we can hear you.
Okay, let's see if I can do this share screen. Am I going to do it? Am I a techie? Let's see. Start from beginning. Can you see this? Can you see the PowerPoint? Really? I did it? I'm so techie. I'm so proud of myself. All right. Hello, everyone. Oh, my goodness. I'm sitting here just thinking about the reflection room. And Heather, thank you so much. I realize I had an aha moment because I realized how much I express in my art in a very different way. I have a million little things that I've drawn here, like grief and joy with stickers. And if you saw this, it would probably, oh, it's very overwhelming, but I've written out so many things, and it's art, my beautiful art. So thank you for that. It was amazing. Hello, everyone. I am so honored to be here, and I honor you for being here, because I know these are not easy conversations, but look at how many people just showed up today. And that means that we need to have these conversations, and we never need to be alone. We can support one another throughout this journey we call life. And so I will lighten it up a little with sharing a bit of my journey. I'm sharing a picture of this movie, Patch Adams. Are there a lot of people that have seen this movie, Patch? Just nod. Everybody's nodding, right? If you have not seen the movie, I invite you to. It's on Prime or Netflix. Robin Williams, who lives in my heart forever, starred as a doctor, a real-life doctor, Patch Adams, who brought joy to people who were grieving and dying. And in this beautiful picture here where he's Patches with this little girl. And, it's interesting because it's already serious enough, isn't it? Grief and death and dying and all of it, trauma, crisis, it's already serious enough. And sometimes we can give ourselves a little break. And that's what Robin Williams was certainly amazing at, and Patch Adams as well. And so it really informed my nursing career in my 27-year career. These are times I dressed in the chemotherapy clinic and palliative care and hospice. And I always loved to make people smile, and I hugged them and I cried. However, I personally and professionally was ill prepared for grief, transitions, and death. And so I did take a leap to create change and be a voice for change with heart, humor, and humanness. And I realize it requires ongoing learning, unlearning, and evolving. I continue to learn each and every day. I learned so much today already. And so here is, yes, the real Patch Adams. This is, I don't know if you could tell that I'm a little excited. I had Patch on I had a Real Life Talks show, and I had him on Zoom, and got to know so much more about the real Patch Adams, and the fact that he has done humanitarian clowning trips since 1985. They have done hundreds of trips, visiting people all over the world in orphanages in war-torn countries. And he has been at the bedside of more than 10,000 people who were dying, many of them children. And Patch says, it's not that I think that I can make a great difference. I can't fix it, but I'm okay to be there. And when they would ask Patch, who do you want to see first? He would say, who is suffering the most? Which made him my hero, because most of us run away from grief, transitions, and death. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. And of course, why would we? We haven't normalized these conversations until now. And when I left my nursing career in 2015, and I wrote my book, Love Your Life to Death, and I realized that we are really a society that is reactive and not proactive, aren't we? And when it comes to how many people, when I called my book title, Love Your Life to Death, I said, why would you use death in the title? And I was like, okay, we really need to talk about this. We avoid it at all costs, but the truth is, grief is something that we experience throughout our lives, right? Children grieve, and when they go from home to school, when you change classes, I mean, there's grief throughout life. And the thing is when we ask, how do we get good at anything? Does anybody know? How do we get good at anything? If you want to play volleyball, how would you get better? You probably have to practice, right? So I took the letters, you know, COVID, everybody's familiar with COVID. I know you are. Everyone's like, yeah, I know COVID. PPE was personal protective equipment. And I have changed that acronym to something to help us create that change. Let's be proactive, practice, and teach by example. Be proactive, practice, and teach by example. And you know, often when we are grieving or we have been through huge loss in our lives, whether it's divorce, diagnosis, job loss, a pet dying, a friend, whatever it may be, relationships changing, we look back and say, wow, I was really ill prepared for that. And I saw that even in the chemotherapy clinic when people knew that they had a poor prognosis, they knew that death was imminent, and yet they still didn't talk about it. And then they looked back. And you know, here's the thing, we can't change what we didn't do in the past. We can learn from it and start to become proactive. And here is the very best thing to start we can do. And I did my TED Talk, and it's all about this, because when I was writing my book, everyone said, I don't know what to do and I don't know what to say. And the greatest answer when you don't know what to do, you don't know what to say, it's awkward, it's uncomfortable, and you can't fix it. 3 magic words. Just show up. Just show up. Just show up when someone is grieving. You don't know what to say, you can say that. I don't know what to say, but I'm here. I had so many people say to me, well, what if I make them cry? Say, wonderful. Let them cry. That means they need to cry. And please, Canadians, stop apologizing for crying. Oh my goodness. I've had so many people, oh, my husband died. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm crying. I am not going to apologize for my tears. I invite you to do the same. If I have tears, it's because I need to have tears. And you know, here's the thing about just showing up, and people don't because they're afraid to do or say the wrong thing. And guess what? You're going to get it wrong. And then you can say you're sorry and do better next time. And you can just show up with your boundaries. Wonderful Brene Brown says, your boundaries are what's okay for you right now and what's not okay. And sometimes it doesn't matter if you're a professional or a neighbor. Sometimes you just don't have the capacity. If you are the counselor and you've just had a traumatic event in your life, you are not going to be able to just show up in that moment. You know what? That neighbor coming over for a cup of tea just might make the difference. And here's the thing about our capacity and our boundaries. We need to practice and we need to stretch so we can get better at just showing up for one another. And Heather, I was so grateful that you talked about mourning, and Dr. Alan Wolfelt is so wonderful, and Maria Kleevkoff taught this to me who studied with Dr. Alan Wolfelt, and she said, our grief is that internal reaction response, normal to loss, transitions, change, whatever it may be. Even in good transitions, we can experience grief. You're happy you have a baby, you might grieve sleep. Just saying. But mourning is that external expression of it. You got to get it out. Write it out in the reflection room, art it out in art therapy, hug it out, cry it out, laugh it out, talk it out, say punch it out. Pillows, not people. Anyone can just show up. And if we can get used to it's okay to be uncomfortable. If someone is mourning, just allow it. There's nothing to fix when someone is converting their grief to mourning. This is a picture of me with a grade 2 class, and the teacher asked me to come speak to her students because they were all grieving huge things. And she said, whether it was big grief or little grief, it's all whatever that person is experiencing. And I taught them in 15 minutes how to just show up for one another and to acknowledge and allow their hard feelings. We need to do a little less adulting, right? And Heather, you also mentioned we don't have to be strong for people. Vulnerable is the new strong, right? Vulnerable is the new strong. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to say, I don't know what to do here. This is really hard for me too. And that's one of the things that we need to do if we want to be able to just show up for others, is show up for ourselves first. Show up for ourselves first. That means do not pretend you're fine when you're not. Hi, how are you? I'm fine. Okay, let's stop doing that. Let's stop doing that. Let's mourn together. Let's grieve together. Let's be a hot mess together, and keeping those boundaries in mind and intact. Sometimes I want to just show up for people and I just don't have the capacity. Other times I stretch myself. And here's the thing about knowing what you need or what you're capable of, whether you are grieving or supporting someone else. You know you best. You know you best. I love having a counselor or therapy. The truth is, when you are grieving or struggling, it is 24/7. So your counselor may help, yes, and this will continue on. So you need to show up for yourself first and be okay with having those boundaries and checking your capacity. And we always celebrate the person that gives, right? Oh, they're so good at giving. Well, let's get good at getting too. Giving yourself time, giving yourself space, getting help, getting the help you need. So as Kat mentioned, I went on a humanitarian clowning trip with Patch, and I knew that it would really stretch me, and I had to get ready because we were going to see people who were suffering and homeless and struggling and living in shacks. And I knew that I would want to fix it. I knew that I could get stuck in why did this happen? And I know that is not, I don't know why. I don't know why some have harder journeys than others. So I started to create my sappy box, my sad and happy box, where I could allow my grief and my joy. And to know that we were there not to fix things, but maybe to give people a little grief break by bringing in some clowning, silliness, and kismith. Everybody know what that means? Of course you don't, I made it up. Keep it simple, make it fun. That was my motto, keep it simple, make it fun. So I actually dressed like that. Talk about stretching and, getting out of your comfort zone. I stretched like that, or I dressed like that on the plane, leaving Toronto airport. Let me tell you, I got some looks and I was okay with that. So here's the wonderful Patch Adams, who's 79 years old, and he continues to go on these clowning trips and just, he always finds the person who's sitting in the corner by themselves, grieving silently. What he says about all of his silly clothes and silly props and having a red nose on is that clowning is a trick to get love close, right? Sometimes we just need a break in having hard conversations or, the seriousness of it all. And so if we're maybe dressed a little silly, maybe we can just have a little break and just sit and be together in silliness. And I love that Patch says gratitude is one of his greatest and most important medicines. This picture with this man looking around the corner, he was someone who wouldn't go near anyone, and Patch got right in his heart. And I also had to, you know, as we remember those that we love and as we remember what we need to allow the grief and the joy. We can do both. And we got to do that. And I acknowledged and allowed all my hard feelings. I spoke to people who were suffering more than I could ever possibly imagine. And I made them laugh and I danced with them. And I went and had a good cry as well. And, you know, here in the middle, this beautiful woman named June, she had a walker and she was 82 years old, and which showed me that anyone can just show up. There were people on this trip from age 27 to 82. It was beautiful. And, you know, again, when we reflect and think about our life with our loved one and our grief, it's okay to acknowledge it and allow the grief and the joy. And I love, I don't know if any of you know, Patch has a prosthesis as well. And he had a below knee amputation and he had his clown shoe fit to his prosthesis. He's just so incredible. And some of the greatest things that I've heard is in memory of. That is one of the things that a wonderful way to just show up for others. Someone said that when her father died, she had to go and clean out his house and she didn't want to, and there was lots of snow. And when she got there, someone had shoveled the walkway and said, "I shoveled the walkway in memory of your dad." Beautiful, right? Doesn't that get you right in the feels? And the most beautiful thing, Matthew 10, when his father died, he gave everybody these little cards. And he said, "Be the evidence that someone's life made a difference. Be the evidence that someone's life made a difference." And so, you know, I think that, again, there are so many beautiful ways we can love one another through our grief and mourning and create joy in our lives again and live our best lives, because that's the greatest way we can honor ourselves and each other. And we can connect with ourselves. Like I said, you know you best. You know what you need the most, right? Trust yourself and trust the process and connect and reach out for help when you need it, and reach out to those who are grieving and mourning, whatever it may be, knowing it can be uncomfortable and awkward. And it's okay, because to love and support people, you do not need to fix it. Simply connect. Because the truth is, we all have something to give. These are many of the silly clowns that that I had the privilege of sharing time with. And the man in the funky yellow pants, well, he was 15 years old. And, you know, we went to the poorest area in Central America, and we just danced through the streets, and we could just see people just smiling from ear to ear. And we heard so many hard stories, and we just loved people through it. It was truly incredible. So I invite you to continue to be a part of your compassionate community. Create compassionate communities wherever you stand, whether it's your neighborhood, a team, your church group, whatever. We can be the change, because it's up to you and it's up to me. It's up to us to be the change that we want to see, because we are all in this together and we're never alone. And so I invite you to just show up like Patch. This is like, I have my I just showed up bracelet, you know, because it's to remind me to just show up for others and just show up for myself first. Do you think I could get Patch to not be silly? Of course not. That's his ponytail in his mouth. That's the best I could get. So just show up like Patch, with heart, humor, and humanness. And I do thank you for just showing up today, because it is, again, the bravest, strongest thing you could do is to be vulnerable and courageous and have these conversations. So I'm going to stop sharing here. And I just want to show you very quickly. Oh, my cheeks are so red. I'm all flushed. So here is this is my Sappy box, you see. My Sappy box, and it says love, Sappy, grief, and joy. See, I am an artist, Heather, and gratitude. And in there, I have all kinds of trinkets to remind me, sometimes when I'm grieving, maybe I just need to do this and just say, you know what, today I just need to throw on my nose. I don't go anywhere without my nose because sometimes I just need to make myself smile. So I invite you to do the same. Get yourself a red nose, go to the dollar store, thrift store, you name it. Go around your house and fill your sappy box with things that bring you joy, that will help you to navigate your grief, and just show up for yourself first as you just show up for others. Thank you so much.
So much, Yvonne. That was lovely. And I think that it definitely re-inspires me to remember to reach out to folks and to show up. And sometimes we just have to be awkward if we're feeling awkward about it. Sometimes we just need to lean into that a little bit and say, I don't quite know, but here I am. And this will, my presence is my gift, and however I can help is how I can help. So thank you so much. And so for getting lots of messages of appreciation. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who shared in the chat, both anonymously or, or otherwise, for sharing all of your experiences. It's really valuable for us to bear witness to one another's joys and sorrows and how we all cope with the different ways that grief affects our lives. And so I just want to, all right. So we have a question from Maxine about, is there Creating Compassionate Communities website? Or Yvonne, you mentioned Compassionate Communities. Are there some recommendations that you have for resources of where people can find out more about creating those compassionate communities in their local areas?
Laurel, you have CHPCA does have some information.
We do have some information. One of the projects that we've undertaken is trying to create compassionate companies so that when an employee is off work, whether they're grieving or bereaved, or they're providing care for someone or maybe for themselves, that their employer actually walks the talk and stands up and really compassionately supports them. But compassionate communities, there is a national movement across Canada. There are some cities that have declared themselves as a compassionate city. But if you want to email, I'll put my email up there. If you want to email, I can connect you wherever you're joining us from to see if there's a compassionate community already starting in your area.
There's also Palliative.ca has information on compassionate communities, and Dr. Alan Kelleher is an amazing advocate who started compassionate cities in the UK. So you can always reach out to me also, and I can chat with you about it.
There's compassionate communities. There's the international. There's an international movement for compassionate communities around the globe, and so there's definitely growing momentum there. And absolutely, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to CHPCA, to Yvonne, or I know here in my local community we have Compassionate Ottawa that does a lot of really great work as well. All right, and if there are any other questions, definitely feel free to send them in the chat or in the Q&A. I will also, if folks want to learn more about Yvonne, her book, her TED Talk, all of the amazing work that she does, Love Your Life to Death, I'm just sending it now in the chat if folks want to go check that out. And she also graciously is lovely enough to share a discount code for folks at this webinar. If you want to purchase her book, you can get a 25% discount code. And so that is also in the chat for you for those who are interested in learning more. And so one thing that I wanted to ask, well, actually, all of our panelists here, what is something that you find that a lot of people don't necessarily know about grief, or a surprising thing that you wish more people knew about grief? Because so many folks have different perceptions and so on, but sometimes grief can be confusing. and have a lot of paradox and hold a lot of contradictions at the same time. And so I'm just wondering, maybe Heather, are there certain things about your experience in your practice that you would want more people to know about if you wanted to share that?
Yeah, thanks, Kat. I think the first thing that comes to mind that I think is so important to make sure that people know is, and I mentioned briefly in my presentation, but grief is not linear. Grief doesn't happen in, one stage after the next, right? I mean, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote, all of that wonderful research about the stages of grief, right? And they're not wrong necessarily, but what was misinterpreted through the works or what wasn't conveyed through that work is that they don't happen one after the other after the other. We don't tick those boxes. So I think for me, one of the things that I often do when meeting with clients for the first time is just normalize the fact that, it's not going to be that you tick these boxes and in 6 weeks you're done, right? I can't give you that, lovely little way to just tick through it, but it's unique. It's a human response. It's natural. It's all your own. I think that's the biggest thing for me, that, do away with the shoulds and the shouldn'ts and any of the expectations, right? And just be present for it and get help when you need it, and work along the process.
I would add to that. Thanks, Heather. And I can only speak for myself, and everybody's experience is different. Is to acknowledge that there are going to be triggers, no matter how or what place you're at in your own journey, and finding that joy again and finding happiness and peace, that there will be triggers. And that's something that really surprised me and my most recent journey through some grief, was how certain days, certain times of the year, whether it was certain activities that I would do with this person, all spawns an emotional reaction to something that a person next to you would never understand. So expect the unexpected, that it can just appear at any time. And it's one of the things I wish that I had kind of known or had expected.
Oh, you're muted, Yvonne.
Am I unmuted?
There you go.
There you go. So again, in the 10 years of having many conversations and in interviewing hundreds of people for my book, I was very surprised that people did not recognize that grief was experienced outside of dying and death, right? Like that. What do you mean? When COVID hit and I said, oh my gosh, we're experiencing global grief, people are like, oh, you mean because people have died? And I said, absolutely. And our loss of the feeling of security, our loss of freedom, our loss of being able to hug, like we grieve throughout life. And in divorce, diagnosis, job loss, mental health issues, children leaving home, children not leaving home. And again, as I mentioned, in good transitions, right? Our youngest, our twins, went to university. I was so thrilled for them and over the moon and bawling my eyes out because they were leaving. There was grief and joy. And I think people sometimes get confused by their hard emotions when something happens. Like when I left my nursing career, I chose to leave when I wrote my book, and yet I was grieving. I cried hysterically. And a lot of people misinterpret that like, oh, maybe I'm making the wrong decisions. Like, well, no, you have to grieve the change. And, there's also big grief and little grief. And again, for some people, let's be honest, some people, if their cat dies, it is bigger grief than a relative. I'm sorry, elephant in the room, because they didn't really like their elephant or their elephant, their relative or their elephant, and their cat was everything to them, right? And so there's big grief and little grief, and we can't just say, oh, I know how you feel, your parent died. Well, this person could have seen their mom every day, and this person hadn't spoken to them in 30 years. And there's also in that grief the loss of what they wish would have been, right? So grief is complex, and it's certainly, like Laurel, you said, it can kind of attack you. It's like a toddler having a tantrum sometimes, and you're like, oh, didn't see that coming. And it can be in whatever, and sometimes you're surprised by it, right? So no matter what you're feeling, even if something is a good change, allow your hard feelings, allow your grief as well.
Thanks, Yvonne.
Absolutely.
I'm a talker. I'm from the Maritime, so I and my blood type is B positive. So I feel like I'm always trying to find the positive spin on things. Is I think if we can all embed a more compassionate approach to how we address others, particularly in during a difficult time, especially. But your words do matter, but that just showing up piece, but trying to have compassion and, just one of the rules of thumb is just don't tell anybody just get over it. Just get over it and move on, and it's going to get better. And like, there are things that you can do compassionately to be present and to give space and hold that space with someone and be supportive, but without telling them how they should feel or how they should address it. Because as mentioned, we know ourselves best, but it's also being vulnerable enough to reach out and ask for help. And I think that's important. And this evening, I know I'm part of an all-party parliamentary committee on mental health, and I speak to the caregiver, the grief and bereavement piece. And I'm always trying to promote that. It does impact our mental health, and we need to do better to support one another. So I wanted to personally thank you for sharing all of your thoughts and messages today. It's really much appreciated, and I'm feeling very grateful, but honored to have held this space with all of you today. Thanks.
Wonderful. And another question that came in was why can grief become debilitating, and what kind of resources might exist for folks who are feeling really really stuck? They're stuck in their grief, and they feel like they need some extra help to process and to start to find ways to work through it and with it. So, not sure, Heather, Yvonne, if you wanted to speak to that. I'm sure. Oh, Heather's eager. There we go.
Hey, yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that that's, such a fear that people have too, right? Once they enter into the realm of grief, and then becomes overwhelming. And if people can't see, a way through it, right, it can be a really scary place to be. When, grief becomes debilitating for certain people, it depends on so many factors in these people's lives, right? Whether there's a support system in place, right? What their sense of, safety in the world is, the resiliencies that they have. What I would suggest, to anybody who's grieving, right? I don't think that everybody who's grieving needs to go into, a professional counseling capacity by any means. But I do think that anybody who's grieving, should accept or try their best to reach out to somebody. Because when we reach out, when we talk to somebody, right, just like one of those needs bound wolf felt, right, when we create a support network around us, then we have somebody who's able to kind of check in on us, and we can check in with them. Grief can become debilitating when we become isolated in our grief, when we don't have resources, when we don't have support. And like I said, it doesn't have to be a healthcare professional that we need. Some people, do want or do need that kind of resource. But I think we need somebody who can check in on us, because if we don't have other things in our life that help us, stay grounded and, stay, fully participating in different acts of self-care and different things that build those strengths and resiliencies, we can get lost in it.
Beautiful, Heather. Yeah, I think that really speaks to that need for connection. I think you were the one speaking about how we're relational beings. We exist in community. We exist with one another. And so it's important to find those relationships that can nourish us and help us kind of find new ways through, and finding that additional help. Also, yeah, with whether it's in the bereavement support group or in wherever people find really kind of those places or those people that uplift them and make them feel heard and validated and energized. So there is also a quick question about how I say but we only have a few minutes left. But if we can have maybe a quick response to how to handle or respond to comments like move on, or maybe like, oh, it's time, or those kinds of comments that can feel quite dismissive. If not sure, Yvonne, if you have any responses that people could kind of keep in mind as a bit of a script to maybe gently guide those people towards more helpful comments that they may make.
Punch them right in the face. No, don't do that. Don't. Sorry, no, don't do that. Do that in your head. And here's the thing. Anticipate that people are going to say these things. They're going to say things that are not helpful, and most of the time it comes from a place of not wanting you to suffer. When I had a friend whose 36-year-old son died, and I said, people are going to say he's in a better place and all the things that you don't want to hear. Just know that it comes from a place of caring, and they don't have to understand what you're going through. And you can also say that hurts my feelings. I feel like you can share your truth. That kind of hurts my feelings, or I'm not ready for that. Thank you. That is not what I want to hear. I believe that we just need to share our truth, or you can just say, thank you very much, and walk away, because not everyone's going to understand, because we do not have these conversations. So people don't know what to do or say. They just don't want you to hurt. Not realizing that by acknowledging and allowing your feelings and your process, and however long it takes, just show up before, during, and always. That is how we can heal ourselves and each other. We just have to get better. And when you feel better about it, then you can let them know in a more constructive way.
I was going to add to that,
God.
Yvonne. That's amazing. And it expected. It is going to happen at some point. So for me, the situation happened to be a close family member, and I had to say, like, whoa, I'm not just going to get over this, and I can't just move on, because it'll always affect me. But if I set boundaries, and I limit my exposure to individuals who are not supportive, if they can't understand, or just say, this person's not bringing out the best in me right now, I need to just reduce or limit my exposure. But it's okay to set up some boundaries for yourself to be protective if they don't get it, when you're asking for them to be respectful of what you're going through, or trying to work through at that time. And it's okay to put up the boundaries and just say, shields are up, you're out. Talk to you maybe next year. But that's perfectly fine too, to set some boundaries.
Absolutely. All right. Well, and on that note, I just want to thank everyone for showing up today. We're at our time. Of course, I know that all of our speakers here could go on forever about this topic, but we hope that you learned some new things or found different ways to remember, reflect, and connect in grief. Today is an important day, National Grief and Bereavement Day, where we get to draw attention and shine a light on this part of our lives that our society often struggles to acknowledge. And we also want to thank the National Grief and Bereavement Day sponsor, GSK, for helping us to shine this light and inspire communities to connect with and through grief and bereavement. And a very special thank you to Heather, to Yvonne, and to the St. Elizabeth Foundation for their support for this webinar as well. And we hope that today inspired you to remember, reflect, and connect, and to show up for one another. So thank you so much, and we will see you next time.
Much love
Bye,
to everybody. Thank you. Thank you for just showing up.